Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 of our Tuesday Tea this May. This month we are breaking all the rules with some really incredible badass women talking about some really specific words and how those words help us to think outside the box, to challenge the status quo, to really move and shake so that we can live our best lives and also inspire others or help others maybe break out of their boxes and shells as well. So this week we have Laura. I'm so excited for her to be here. She is a dear colleague and friend. She is an LCSW. She lives in Texas. She has works in a private practice with clients who have experienced trauma, grief, and loss. And she uses some really cool therapeutic intervention. She's specially trained in EMDR, IFS, and she also has spent over 16 years teaching and in leadership positions in BSW, MSW. Those are social work programs for those who don't know the acronyms. Just really helping to coach the next generation of social workers. And she has really utilized this word innovation, I think, in her work of how she's had to come up against some systems to really help other students and future generations of clinicians be the best they can be in a land that likes to do things the way they like to do things, even if it's old. So, welcome, Laura. I'm so excited to have you here today. Um, yeah, and I want to kind of jump in. Like, what is your take on innovation? What's maybe an example of how you've personally come up against it or used that or faced a challenge when trying to be innovative in
Mhm.
your own life?
Yeah. So I think innovation is so interesting, especially when you're working with systems.
Mhm.
And, you've probably heard the phrase, don't reinvent the wheel. And I think sometimes we can get really caught up in like, well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, so we can just keep doing things the way they've been done. And yes, and sometimes the wheel needs some grease or
Or it does need to be
maybe a
reinvented.
new tire on the wheel.
Yeah.
We're not still driving wagons, but we still use wheels in cars, right? So
Mhm.
the thing that comes to mind the most is when I was in full-time higher education for a little over 8 years and transitioned out of that. Um, and I'm still involved in higher education in a few different ways. But if you think about higher education in general, the model of you come to class, you sit, the person lectures and you absorb the information, and then you go about writing the paper, doing the project, taking the test, um, by and large has not changed. But if you think about our world and how much has changed since the beginning of universities or higher education, um, it's actually kind of funny that that's still how we do it.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, there are certainly professors and teachers out there who don't do that. Online education is its own kind of animal and it's different, but it's also largely the same, very
Yeah.
repetitive.
New structure.
Um,
You still have
yeah,
assignments, you come, you do your
yeah,
work, you sit in front of a computer essentially. Same idea.
yes. And so one thing I noticed, and I saw this too in social work in particular, and if it, those of you that maybe are familiar with counseling too, like in those internship or practicum experiences, it's very much like, well, this is how we do it because this is how we've always done it. And this is how the accrediting body has given us an example of how to do it. Not that they've said this is how you have to do it. Here's the example they give, though. And what I found was it's students were less and less engaged.
Mm,
Students were not getting as much out of things. And we were constantly asking students to fit a mold in a world that, the mold has changed, I would say, over time.
yeah.
And not that not that we don't all have to like adhere to kind of the reality of being an adult and being in the world and
Mhm.
working and all of that, but we don't all have to be a brick in the wall. And the bricks can look different and the bricks can be different sizes. Some
Yeah.
of them maybe aren't even bricks. And so
Right. Right.
a lot of what I found was I had to step outside my comfort zone. And that meant what I was used to doing, first of all, in the classroom and in the field with students, but also outside of my comfort zone of what colleagues and other people might think by me doing something
Mm,
different. And I think both of those things are really challenging because it means we're still learning in the
mhm,
process,
mhm,
and it can be really vulnerable to still be a
mhm,
learner.
mhm.
It also means that we can feel really vulnerable to what other people think when we're trying something new. And that can be scary. I'm not going to say that I'm the type of person that's like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to do what I want. No, that's not, that's not the kind of
Yeah,
person I am.
yeah,
So that was, trying new things, um, it was scary, like in those ways. But for me, the benefit of seeing how students connected differently with the
mm,
material or the work they were
mhm,
doing in the field indicated to me that it actually meant something.
yeah,
Um, and so it was, I think that that was a really cool experience for me to kind of see what
firsthand.
me being vulnerable was able to do for somebody else in their experience.
And I think you bring up such great points that even if we are the person who does say, I don't care what anyone thinks, ultimately we all still do care what people think. We are tribal in our existence, and being a part of the tribe keeps us safe and survives. So ultimately there is a tension if we are having to go outside of the tribe and what the tribe mentality is, even if it's the right thing to do, or even if it's actually a more helpful thing to do. It's such a leap of faith and boldness, which we even talked about that word like last month of being bold. So I think it's something to really harness and own that it's not easy. But I think in your case, you got such a positive reward or return for your being the leader of that innovation or one of those thought leaders on that, that it made it feel safe and feel worth it, which then gives us that positive experience to hopefully maybe do that again in that same arena or even possibly in another area of life. Right. But I appreciate the sentiment that it's like not just like something easy to do or like it's whatever, no risks. That it still has a lot of weight to it, but sometimes the risk is worth the reward, so to speak, or it does make life better overall, even if there's some pushback or people aren't seeing it the same way we're seeing it right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, how do you foster this concept of innovation in your own life? What strategies or tools do you use to get you to that place where you're like, I see this vision so clearly. Like, how do I, though, get others on board? How do I put it out there? How do I feel bold or brave enough to try it? What sort of strategies would you recommend or give to others if they're thinking about being innovative in their own worlds or spaces?
Yeah, so I could think of two examples that I actually had to do a little bit differently. So the first being, in higher ed, I really had to there wasn't a lot of other people. I mean, there were other people I could connect with, but not a lot of other people that were on the same page as I was in terms of, I'm thinking of like we created like cool cultural immersion experiences for
Mm,
students to see how social work works in other countries. And doing field education in a way that um, created more like it wasn't just the here's the 10 things you're supposed to be doing in your site. It was
mhm,
actually what are you doing at your site already? How does it fit what we need? And then what should we add instead?
mm,
Rather from this perspective of I think so often it's like, well, here's the 10 things I need to learn. Let's create things for me to do. But nobody else was doing it that way. But I knew in my gut that like this was working and that meant it was meaningful. And I just had to follow that. And I
yeah.
think listening to that instinct is for me one way that I really find that like I can continue with innovation. We all have the ability to be discerning in situations. And so often the environment we're in or the people we're around or the things that we've always known
Mhm.
don't we quiet our gut when it's like, but what about this? Or
Um,
this
yeah.
feels better or this feels right. And so sometimes we need to change our environment. So when I was in
Mhm.
higher ed, like I couldn't really control that.
Right.
It's a very large system that I knew.
You
I
weren't
mean,
gonna
I'm a social
change
worker and we work
completely.
with systems, but I was like, I'm not going to change this
Yeah.
system. And so I just tried to change the small system of working with my students in the way that I worked with them.
Yeah.
I would meet with every field instructor personally a week into the practicum to make sure it was going well. Like other hands-on things, I'm like, I can control this and I know that this will make a difference. Um, but another example of like where I felt in my gut that like I think I want something different was in my private practice experience.
Mm.
So I found that I just began to notice that when I would get to that like 45-minute mark, um, I was like, man, we have to end in 5 minutes. And we just got to like a huge place. I saw so much opportunity for my clients to like go a little bit deeper, get into, because with grief and loss and trauma, we have to go deep. And sometimes it
Yeah.
takes a little bit for people's systems to be able
Get
to
ready
get
to do
there.
that. Mhm.
And the practice I was working at, everybody was doing a really good job at what they did, but they were all kind of following the same traditional mold of like 50-minute session. If you do EMDR, you follow the strict protocol of EMDR.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and it's all by the book, and
Mhm.
that you kind of that that's just what we do, right? That
Mhm.
traditional, you go to therapy and it's 50 minutes and
Yeah.
you spend 20 minutes chit chatting and then you get to it and then you leave,
Yeah.
basically.
Or you drop the big bomb at the end and you're like, "Okay, bye. I'll see you
Yeah.
in 2 weeks."
Yeah.
You're like,
And everybody there was doing really great work. It wasn't that
Mhm.
it wasn't working. Like
Mhm.
everybody I worked with is really skilled clinically.
Mhm.
And I had so much respect for what they did. I just found the client population I was working with didn't fit
Needed
that
something
mold.
different. Yeah.
And I knew something had to be different. And it wasn't because of anything that they were doing, just the way that the office was set up. I didn't have the ability to do longer sessions. And I didn't have the ability to bring in some more of the somatic work that I really saw needed to be done with my
Mhm.
clients. And um, I thought that I was like onto something with that, you know. I just hadn't met other people that thought that.
Gotcha.
Um, and I ended up meeting someone who has a private practice, and I ended up moving private practices. And what's so interesting is like that was a really big risk for me. It was going to be more of a financial commitment for me to leave. But I believed that what I saw and what my gut was telling me with my clients would
Mhm.
pay off. Like that I would see more growth in my clients, I would see more change in them, that
Mhm.
would have more traction with things. And so I did kind of take a risk in switching places,
Yeah.
because there's a lot that goes with that. But I found that what we're doing at the practice I work at now is so vastly different than what other places are doing. And we see what I was seeing before was true. Like our clients benefit from longer sessions. Our clients benefit from somatic work and
Mhm.
integrating other mind body connection
Mm.
things. And I have more flexibility to do that where I'm at. And with innovation, like you have to be able to play a little bit. I know like as adults, we don't think about playing, but I think of that with my clients. Like I have the space and the ability to play around and like, let's go see the somatic person before you come to session and then come with me and let's see what that does for your system.
Yeah.
And there's no protocol for that. There's no book,
Mhm.
it part of it is just understanding clients' systems and what works for them and then creating something for them. And so yeah, I was able to listen to my gut in that example, but I was also able to find a different environment that
Yes.
supported what I
Right.
was seeing. So
100%.
sometimes you have to change your environment too.
Yeah. And I love that idea of that there are different layers of what we are trying to foster change in or recognizing the limits of our control and our power and accepting or noticing what is beyond that. And so, like in higher ed, you no, you, Laura Beaver, cannot change the whole higher education system that has been what it is since the beginning of time, right? I'm not saying it doesn't need to change or there aren't things that like as a collective larger group people can continue to question and push for. But just because you can't change the whole thing doesn't mean we just give up and say, well, this is just how it goes. Like I'll just keep my head down and do my work, right? You were able to find this more I always get these wrong. Macro is bigger, micro smaller.
Mhm.
A micro, I always get them inverted. A micro space that like what could you do as you're the one supervisor for these people and like how could you change it a little bit within still the rules to
Yeah.
keep your job and all of that, but in a way that felt appropriate and comfortable and healthy. And you saw huge results. And no, it's not again across all of the United States and every social work program yet. I know you're working on making those bigger impacts, but it doesn't mean that what you did was any less meaningful or important, right? And then in same with this other work, you had more space to change a whole system because you could move to a whole different practice. It's a different world, there's different politics. You didn't have to live in that one system forever and then try to make it work. And like you said, sometimes we have to change our environment. And so I think it's just a good reminder for individuals who are thinking about places where their guts nudging them or where they're feeling more creative or they want to play or they recognize something that's just maybe outwardly wrong or is harmful or isn't helping or could be easier or better, that we don't have to get discouraged if it can't be the huge thing or we don't necessarily have to quit a whole job and switch a job. There
Yeah.
are little things we can do and you did 1,000 little innovative things. Some were bigger, some were smaller, but all of those held an important place and I think really showed really helpful results. And so no matter where we are on our journey of innovation or change or what landscape or career or place in life we're in, there's pockets and moments to foster that. And some can
Mhm.
be tiny and some can be huge, but they all really have a big impact, I think, from all your examples is what I kind of
Yeah.
took,
Yeah. Absolutely.
which I think is really awesome. How would you say, like, what's your tip on how to take action on that gut piece? Like, how are you brave enough to do that? Or what helps you say, okay, this is hard or scary or whatever feelings might come up? Like, what has helped you
Mhm.
overcome that and just like then do it? Because it we can know a lot of things, but we've gotten really good at ignoring our gut or like making excuses, which, there's a time and place for everything. But like what helped you like push past that and actually get on the other side of change, so to speak?
Um, so I think it's important to say that, like, before I do anything, I can tell you the 1,000,000 reasons why it won't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's where my brain goes immediately. It doesn't go to the, like, I mean, I can think of all the ideas, but then I
Mhm.
definitely have a part of my brain that's like, and here's the stack of papers that will prove why this won't work. And that's a challenge. I'm not naturally optimistic in that way of like,
Mhm.
let's go, it'll work, we'll make
Mhm.
it work. And so for me, taking action is not necessarily like, I think I too sometimes want like, but I want to have a plan and I want to like lay out the plan and I want to
Mhm.
see the plan. I want predictability and control is
Mm.
what I'm getting at. And so I have found over time that sometimes you just try small little things and you see what happens. And those small little things add up. And
Yeah.
those small little things give you information to help you know
Mm.
what the bigger thing might be, um, that you could try, that you could step out on, that, like, I'm just thinking of, so I can tell you, so when I was doing field education, I was hesitant to reach out to field instructors, like the people supervising students, because I was really afraid of them saying all the things that were hard, or like a student was doing wrong, or like what we as a program were doing wrong. Like I was afraid to hear that feedback.
Mm,
But what I found was like my worst fear didn't come true when I actually
mhm.
reached out to them. They were grateful that someone was connecting with them, that they were grateful that somebody cared about what was going on, that we could have a discussion about things. And it wasn't necessarily putting work on my plate of things I had to fix. And so I think too, like sometimes it's like you like dread the thing that you think
Mm,
might be different, and then you try it, and oftentimes our brain is incorrect in its assessment of how it's going to go, and it's important information for us to collect like along the way. So I call it like the little filing cabinet, so like, okay, I have a file of, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to have a little filing cabinet in my brain of, or maybe you like like make notes for yourself. Okay, I tried this was the
yeah.
outcome. And it's funny, this is something I tell my clients to do sometimes too, is like have a note or a folder on your phone that's like evidence, where you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
screenshot things or whatever,
Yeah.
that whenever you come back to that thought of, I don't I don't know if I should do this, I don't know if this is going to work, I'm scared, look back at the evidence and be like, okay, I was scared to make that phone call, but it went really well. Okay.
So just because
And
I'm scared doesn't mean it's gonna be wrong. Like,
yeah.
even I might still feel that way every time. Hopefully it'll get less, but it doesn't always mean it's fact, right? A feeling isn't a fact. Valid, but it's not a truth or a fact per se.
Yeah. And let's say that like it is a total flop,
Mhm.
rather than getting caught up in the, that was a total flop, that, or I totally messed that up, is what did I learn from that
Mm,
experience?
mm,
And I think too, like that was just a thing I started practicing with students, and other, like when I would work with other people in field and in higher ed, was like, okay, we tried this. What did, like, I could tell like if students were not engaged, what is it that you're not engaged with here? Why, what's the disconnect for you? Talk to me. Tell me why this isn't working. Tell me why you're not interested in this. And it could be like, well, because class is from 5 to 10 o'clock at night, and
and I just don't care
and
anymore.
I don't care at this point in
Yeah,
the day, which is a
yeah,
valid answer.
yeah.
Um, or it could be something else. And I think I had to get to a place where I wasn't so afraid of what could be considered as like criticism or negative feedback, and
Mhm.
look at it more as, this is just information that I can use to change what I'm doing. And the
Mm,
more information I have, the more I can like be very purposeful in the change that I make.
I love that. No, I think that's a really helpful visual. I think that's a helpful, way to see both sides, right? Like, yes, sometimes it is going to be great and better than we expected, and sometimes it might be a bit like we thought, but never 100% any one thing. And I think being able to continue to hold those dual perspectives or push or challenge and not take that as a sign to give up, but to kind of keep going, reworking its information. It's not like it's bad or wrong. Um, and to keep imagining and dreaming. Because I think when we get so comfortable is not a bad place to be, but it usually means we're pretty stagnant. Like, we're not actually really making any more growth or leaps or moves. And for some people, that's where they want to stay forever. And like, that's fine. But to me, that is such a waste of potential and opportunities. And, if we just stayed comfortable, we wouldn't have cell phones or planes or go to the moon or, like we are a culture and a species of people that are constantly wanting to kind of keep evolving and growing and innovating. And I think personally, we lose sight of that in our own lives sometimes. We appreciate other people doing it for us and giving us new things to play with or get on board for. But how can we have just as much opportunity to have that power and control in our own lives and to do that for ourselves or the people in our world or the things we believe in or hold dearly or feel passionately about. And so it's kind of like giving permission that we all can do it and we all should be doing it. And we're missing a really big part of happiness and fulfillment if we're not, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
And I think too, like So I was definitely that kid that like school came so easily to me that
Mhm.
then as I got older, I really had that belief of like, well, if this is hard, I probably shouldn't be doing it.
Ah.
And I mean, I wasn't, this is not my natural bent. Like I had to work to get here and it's still, there are days that it is really hard.
Mm.
And so I think it's important to just remind ourselves that like we can change and adapt. Like this isn't necessarily naturally who I was for a lot of my like childhood and early adulthood. But different situations where it was like I I felt so stagnant that I couldn't, it wasn't like fun anymore. You know, it wasn't it
Uh-huh.
being
Uh-huh.
routine and easy wasn't fun and
No,
I couldn't live in that
no.
space, and
Right.
so I had to grow and change, and so I think that
Mhm.
it's just important to remember that for ourselves too, that it just because, you know, I say these things doesn't mean that I'm like,
They
I would
came to you
just
so naturally, or you've always just
yeah,
been this
yeah,
way. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's an important reminder. And again, there's nothing wrong. Like you could have stayed in that job and done it the way it was supposed to be
Yeah.
done. You could have stayed at that other private practice and figured it out and still helped people, right? Like there was nothing wrong. Um, in the sense that in those examples, nothing was like hurting you or someone else in a way that like, no, this like has to change. I can't participate in it. It just wasn't, it just wasn't meeting all the needs. It just wasn't checking all the
Mhm.
boxes. It was too hard at some point to keep looking at something being done so poorly or so like the deficits when you knew there was another option and another way, right? Like it didn't have to be like that. And so for a while it worked to just kind of live in the system and do it, but then I think you sound like you reached that point of like I can't participate in this anymore because it doesn't have to be like this, and I I'm choosing to go find the space where it works in the way that I really believe and know it can work even better, right? But I don't think anyone was coming to harm in those
Yeah,
environments. It's
yeah,
just, so it's not a good or bad or right or wrong. Again, we're living more in this gray, but like, but what else? But what else? What if I think a little bit differently about this or a little bit about that? Like, it's not to dismantle your whole foundation of what you've come to believe or who you are or your strengths. But I think that we should always be pushing, questioning, challenging, checking in on every level, not just professionally, to keep us sharp and to keep us growing because humans are ever changing, right? Like it's not just like 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. We're cool. We're not going to like reimagine, addition. Like it is what it is. But there, in all these other spaces in our own lives, our own bodies, and the people around us, and the systems that we live in, they are always fluctuating. And so we need to kind of be critically ahead and thinking about those changes too and how we want to participate or choose them or just be along for the ride or I think we don't always consider how connected everything is at times. So
yeah, absolutely.
well, this was a great conversation. I think it gives lots to think about of just how to really continue to pull that gut feeling, how to listen to it, how to harness it, how to feel like we can step out and not just live in the comfortable, but get uncomfortable where there might be places for really awesome change. I mean, it sounds like you are so thankful for the things that you chose to shift in your own life because the outcomes were so positive and had really big impacts personally and on others. Um, and so I think just using Laura's example or examples that we all probably have in our own lives of where we have done this, how we can kind of keep rethinking the wheel when it definitely needs to be rethought or even recreated, right? You know, the first wheel was like square, I think, and then they were like, "Oh, to work," and it became a wheel, right? So, like, sometimes we really do just need to shake things up. Is there anything that you want to leave folks with of where to find you, or any offers you have, or anything we want to kind of share just so people can connect with you if they resonated from our conversation?
Sure. So, there'll be a link that you can connect with me through my email list. So part of the big piece of innovation I'm trying to work on right now is I feel like so much opportunity is being lost, specifically in social work, higher ed, and how we supervise students in the field and how we supervise students or not students, but people clinically afterwards. And I really have some cool programming coming out this year that will help support people in that, and have some presentations and webinars coming up if you're interested in learning more a little bit about that work. Currently offering coaching in that space, but also consulting with organizations and universities. So that would probably be the best place to connect with me right now. It's just through that, and I promise I will not spam you. It'll be like once a month.
Yes. No.
um, and adding it, hopefully adding value to, and then LinkedIn is the other great place that you can connect with me on.
All right. I will make sure I have those in the email so you can quickly access them to connect or find more out about Laura. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope everyone's having a wonderful Tuesday, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.